Science of Learning Education Network. Hello, everyone. My name is Winsome Wade. I'm an advisor to the Global Science of Learning Education Network. Welcome to part 3 of the Digital Learning webinar series on promises and possibilities for the science of learning in a post-pandemic education landscape. The series is led by Dr. Tracey Tokuhama-Espinosa, and today's session is entitled, What Do the Best Teachers Do? Pedagogies that work online, in hybrid, and face-to-face learning. For those of you joining us first time in the series, welcome. You can find the recordings of part 1 and part 2 on our website, and we'll drop that website in the chat. As we are preparing to introduce our speakers, those of you who haven't done so yet, go ahead, please, and put your name, where you're calling in from, and say hello to us in your native language or another language that you use. Today's webinar is utilizing the flipped classroom approach. In your registration information, you were asked to watch a short video that was recorded by Dr. Tokuhama-Espinosa. We hope that you were able to watch and view that video. So let me introduce our speakers for today, starting with Dr. Tokuhama-Espinosa, who is a professor of education at the Harvard University Extension School and author of her latest book that's entitled Bringing the Neuroscience of Learning to Online Teaching, an Educator's Handbook, and it's from Columbia University Teachers College Press. And this series has been based on that particular book, and Tracey can talk more about that when she starts her presentation. We're also joined by Dr. Courtney Teague, Director of Professional Learning Content and Learner Experience with the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools initiative at Digital Promise. And we have 2 other experts who will be joining the overall discussion. Professor Miriam Strushner from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, who does research in educational technology, teaching methods, and pedagogic theory. And Joy Titharagan has taught math and physics on both sides of the Arabian Sea for over 40 years. She also taught in Lusaka, Zambia, before she moved to Liverpool, and there she studied high energy physics and education. Today's webinar will launch us into a digital learning working group at Jasolin. We're asking you to join us in this effort in working as a smaller group to delve deeper into the topic. This topic has been explored with us again on a 3-part series. We now have a massive amount of content that we can work from, and we would like to delve deeper into deeper issues around the subject. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Tracey, our lead speaker today. But just before I do that, I want to remind you that we'll end the webinar in 1 hour, but we will keep the line open 30 minutes just for general discussion. So please feel free to stay on with us. So over to you now, Tracey.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Winsome, for that very beautiful and generous introduction. And I'm so excited to hear from the other people who will be sharing. Miriam, Courtney, JT, it's a real pleasure to share the platform with you. I thought that today, since many of you are coming from teaching and a lot of you are very curious about the contributions from the science of learning, that I would just do 2 things briefly, maybe over the next 20 minutes, and then we'll launch into a conversation here. But I just wanted to contextualize where we are as far as understanding teaching practices within the context of the learning sciences, and to do this by adding on maybe some unfamiliar vocabulary to some of you. We are all, I think, very well versed in the fields of different learning sciences, but one of the biggest challenges I think that we find is that we don't often share the same words for some of the things that we're doing. So when it comes down to figuring out what are the best teaching practices that we can gain, we have some conversations that might be a little bit confusing. So I wanted to start at that point, because I thought my value added would be to do that kind of a macro overview so that we can get into the weeds of the real classroom situations with the other speakers. So I hope that's acceptable to you. The Global Science of Learning Network, which was recently launched, is an amazing initiative. And as Bob Weiss likes to say, this is this grand network of networks. And within that network is something, it's a lot of people, over 400 members. One of the institutional members would be IMBIS, sort of the International Mind, Brain, and Education Society, which is where I kind of like to land my roots and say that this is where I'd like to say that that my interest was sort of nascent interest from this particular group. But this led me to teach a course at Harvard. It's called the Neuroscience of Learning. It's an introduction to mind, brain health and education. And as you can see, sort of expanding the different learning sciences from not from just psychology, neuroscience, and education and pedagogy, but also looking at mental and physical health and how that influences people's potentials to learn. So from that, we end up having what we'd say is the greatest goal of this field of the science of learning, is to actually learn how to teach better. It's great to have knowledge for knowledge sakes. How do humans learn? We've been studying that for about 150 years, internationally. But how do we teach? The science of how to teach is something that's really, in its infantile stage. And David Daniel, the first managing editor of the Mind Brain Education Journal, likes to say, we have to be moving towards a science of teaching, or really this is not usable knowledge. And so to try to get to that, we shared a video with you that showed 40 different pedagogical interventions that were supported by the learning sciences that work in all fields. And we asked you as a flipped conference to send in questions. And I decided that, sorry to play favorites with Winsome, but basically one of the overarching questions was basically, how do we use all this if I'm a classroom teacher and I want to operationalize this kind of information? Where does that really, how does that become usable knowledge? What thing should I choose first if I had to order this information, which is a great question. And so we're going to use this as kind of an overarching question to put things into a greater context. And to do that, basically understanding the history of the learning sciences, it's really one of invisibility to visibility. You might have heard of the great books that are coming out of Harvard Project Zero, which talk about making thinking visible. There's a lot that goes on in the brain that is not visible to us in the classroom, observable behavior. And that's one of the main problems that we have when we try to talk about what do we measure. And so one of the ways we went about doing this was trying to create what we call a timeline of where information from mind, brain, and education has come from, so that people appreciate that as far back as philosophical renderings, Confucius, Taoism, looking at the Greeks and getting information of this exploration, we really didn't think until the Egyptians pointed this out about 4,000 years ago, that the brain was really the center of all of this. And we didn't get an idea of a theory of a cell theory of how things work in the brain until around the 1500s. And we didn't even confirm that until the 1600s, when we started to use microscopes. And then actually not until the 1900s when we started using electron microscopes. And so how do you measure learning in the brain? Is it through oxygenation and blood circulation, or where electricity happens, or how neurons are connected? And we have to combine all of that with educational theories about where education, what do we really value as educators? What is really human about this practice we have of learning to teach and learn? And we've learned a lot from animal studies, and we've learned a lot, from behavioral studies, and we've learned a lot from other international studies, from Vygotsky and Piaget, and trying to add to this knowledge. But we didn't even coin the term cognitive sciences until the 70s. And the Society for Neuroscience didn't even exist until 1971. And Leslie Hart's book that said that anybody who dares to be a teacher, it's like designing teaching is without understanding the brain is like trying to build a glove without understanding the hand. We have to get into that. And that wasn't until the 80s. And so we've had multiple theories that have come up. We've had multiple visions, and then we've had multiple efforts to try to unite an understanding of bringing mind, brain, health, and education all together. It wasn't until the 1950s that Kandel proposed, let's mix this idea of cell theory and get this neuron theory or networking. How does the brain actually, we can document learning through these neural networks that are now being constructed. And all of that is very, very new, and wonderful people at Harvard like David Perkins and others have really contributed to sort of advancing this idea of now looking at the whole child. We really have to be looking at all of the things that combine learning. And Sarah Jane Blakemore and Uta Frith made a point of saying that, all animals learn, but only humans teach. And only we humans have actually made a science out of doing that. So how do we make the science of teaching more accessible? So IMBUS was only founded in 2007, launching its first meeting. And so having groups like this one, only founded a few years ago, GSOLAN, to bring together people who care about uniting information from a transdisciplinary perspective, to unite information from neuroimaging, for example, with ideas from advancements in educational psychology. All of these things are pretty much brand new, and more has happened in the past 15 years than has happened in the past 7,000 years before that. So we should really be kind of feeling privileged at how wonderful it is that we are here at this particular moment of change, and actually this very dynamic introduction of an interest of the average person to learn more about how humans learn, and taking into consideration now these very nuanced elements. What is the gut-brain axis? What is grit and resiliency? How does all of this fit into our own new science of how to teach better? And how can we get rid of these terrible neuromyths that people still believe about the brain in the wrong way, and now create a different or better way of approaching learning? And so the history of learning sciences is important, but I think that most teachers, we don't get a whiff of that. Most teachers are taught how to do lesson plans and come up with activities, which makes them think that we have to actually, what activity can I learn from this workshop, as opposed to understanding where perspectives that you're taking on this. So just want to remind us that there's different units of analysis that are used to decide how we teach. There are international standards, obviously, PEARLs, TIMS, all of these different exams that come out that we compare ourselves with at a national level. There's national, state, district, school levels, and we get down to the individual, right? But then we want to bring in neuroscience here, which is looking at brain biology, behavior, changing neurons, neural network theories. And those things are the whole combination that we're trying to now have a new perspective. What is the learning science? What are the learning sciences? And how does that contribute to better teaching and learning? And all of this is done through an international. As you look around and you see the hellos in the chat, you'll see that we have people from all corners of the globe. And that's really the goal here, is to have a human movement towards some kind of consensus about the ways that we should best teach and to take advantage of the ways that people learn. So at a policy level, we're definitely taking information from international studies and national studies. And at a practice level, many teachers, at least in the United States, are bound by state and district and even school guidelines. This is our school mission. This is the things that we're going to prioritize. And all of this sort of acts on an outcome, which is student learning. I'd like to propose today that we're going to shift that focus a little bit and actually look at the learner as kind of the starting point. If we go from that individual, we stop using them as just the subject of, the outcome of what we expect, and maybe looking at the ways that things that happen to the learner, those exchanges with their teachers, how well they sleep, what they eat, conditions of poverty, what does that actually do to their ability to learn, and how do we adjust that at our own level of being teachers, great teachers. So this reminds us then, any of those teaching for dummy books that say, do this, and then this happens, are just wrong. We know that the teaching learning dynamic is this really intricate spiral of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And we now know these sub-elements. Teaching is not just one thing. There's multiple things that teachers do every single minute in their classroom, and multiple things that learners are doing simultaneously as well that have to be taken into consideration. And all of this happens, given the learning sciences dynamic, at different scales. It happens at a molecular level, at the level of the brain, at the level of cells, of neurons. It also happens at this individual level, but what we often study are also classroom situations as well as international comparative studies. For example, in cultural neuroscience, we look at these things. So basically the idea is understanding that now the learning sciences contribution are basically to join all of this and expand what we now look at as at an individual level to help us teach better. I just want to put this into historical context for those of you who have followed sort of the drama of the evolution of the learning sciences, which wasn't really actually founded, believe it or not, the society wasn't founded, the learning sciences first handbook wasn't published until 1991. So all of this is kind of fresh, and maybe even younger than some of you out there. If I'm looking at your faces, maybe you are actually, we weren't even born when all of this happened. But John Brewer has sort of been considered the person who drew the line in the sand. People misrepresent, I think, his ideas that he said, you know, it's a bridge too far. You can never join neuroscience and information about the brain. What he has said consistently throughout is that there's insufficient use of the bridge of psychology to join education and neuroscience. There's so much that education and psychology share and so much that neuroscience and psychology share, but we're not using psychology enough. And so if you do a quick reading, you'll see that he calls this out over and over again. The psychology literature has to be used a lot more, which is why in our model, at least in our Harvard classes, that we try to approach this at least through mind, brain, health, and education, if not other learning sciences as well. So given all of this, you guys watched, many of you, we hope, watched the video on these 40 pedagogies that are supported by information from the learning sciences. Now, this is going to be the biggest idea that I want to leave you with, and because it's a new one, you're the first group in the whole world that I'm going to test this out on, but let's see how this flies. People say, where does this information come from? There is very little information directly from neuroscience to education. What are you talking about? There's only this one great study that Pankaj Saw and his group in Queensland are actually doing, where they're wiring up kids in real classrooms, testing and measuring their cortisol levels as they do their brainwaves and the level of sweat and recording all of their things. There's only one of these going on. How can you possibly generalize and say these pedagogies work in all contexts? What I wanted to do is to propose to you a different kind of taxonomy. The evidence comes from 6 different types of bodies of review. The first has to do with near transfer studies. Those are studies that are directly coming from neuroscience that have an impact in education, like the one I just mentioned now, and other examples that I'm going to give you shortly. But then there are other studies which are considered equivalency studies. These are studies that are actually saying the same thing in neuroscience and psychology and education, but they're using different terminology, which is why people are not connecting those dots yet, right? Then there's another kind of mix. These are far transfer studies. These are things from neuroscience that we presume have an impact in education, okay? And then there's far transfer studies, which are actually the studies that come from education that we presume can be proven in neuroscience, right? Because we have these intermediary studies that have to occur. And then there's far transfer studies that are okay. We know they're given the thumbs up in education and psychology, but there's really weak evidence in neuroscience. But the evidence that can be made, the light evidence that does exist, is actually very convincing. And so is the small number of studies going to stop us from using that? That's the big question there. And then finally, this is the answer to Winsome's question. And I think Fanny also posed this as well, is, so where do I start? There's a list of 40 things. Where do I begin? Well, there's a bunch of studies that we're going to show you that actually are, they're nearer far transfer studies. These are low-hanging fruit. These are things you could actually do as a teacher tomorrow that have been accepted in education, that actually have evidence in neuroscience, but nobody has drawn that link yet to say these are studies that are supported from the learning sciences. And so just a quick example of each of those, and then I'll stop. And by the way, when I speak of evidence, I just wanted to say that we are sharing with you, and Cynthia will share this in the chat, all of the evidence for every single one of those pedagogies is in what we call bundles, which are mini libraries that hyperlink to the articles or the evidence that support each of these things. And so what we do in our Harvard class is have a mini library for each topic. And if you you'll click on that, it hyperlinks to other hyperlinks of articles that talk about memory or affect or the role of attention and learning and so on. And so every one of the pedagogies as well is given support evidence there. So for those of you who would like to look and go straight to the source, we're inviting you to do that and also have your own view of this information. So what is the type A, the best? This is the gold star standard. If we could have direct studies from neuroscience to education that would improve teaching, we do already have a couple of examples of that. We have things from interleaving, for example, where we know that we have studies in schools that actually show that there's an impact on individual learning, right? There's a lot of evidence from education, but there's also evidence from the lab that shows that interleaving improves learning outcomes. Basically, it improves memory, and memory therefore improves learning. And so we know that there's evidence out there in both of these, and we can definitely say with great confidence that this is supported by the learning sciences. Using interleaving in classes, this means teaching, leaving it alone for a while, returning, reinforcing, going deeper, leaving it alone for a while, as opposed to block instruction where you say, here's all of algebra 1, and then we move on to geometry without having that repetitive return to the information over time. So interleaving frequent low stakes testings, great amount of evidence. But we also have evidence that are equivalencies. There's terminology that is different, but basically are explaining the exact same processes. For example, we believe that growth mindsets exist. If you believe that you have a growth mindset, not fixed, I'm not just my genes or my zip code, I can change, I can do something, I can be better than I am right now, that actually influences learning outcomes. No doubt about that from the psychological evidence, right? But we also know that it's inevitable. Neuroplasticity exists and influences learning outcomes. So experience-based neuroplasticity basically is telling us the exact same thing. And this is something that Carol Dweck really leans into in her own research and says, you cannot not you shouldn't be prevented from having a growth mindset because it's the way your brain's default is. You're going to learn. You cannot not learn. Therefore, you should learn in the most positive way possible, right? So these are equivalencies. But then we have research from FAR transfer studies, which is basically practice that we know improve cognition and learning, but they aren't valued very much in education. For example, we know that mind wandering, for example, wonderful studies in neuroscience showing the benefits to mind wandering for creative insight, and basically just letting your mind go. Let yourself just, I've thought about this, I've focused my concentration. Now let me stand up and just go weed the garden, or let me cut some vegetables, or do something a little bit different. We know that there's great benefit there as far as improving or giving time for creative incubation. But we also know that in education, we get a lot of pushback on this. And I think, Winsome, you've mentioned this in your comments, right? We're trying to find ways to stop kids from mind wandering. How do we keep everybody on task all the time? And we're not giving a value to that other level of cognition, which is extremely valuable in allowing people to be more optimally functioning as far as learning is concerned. And so we get a lot of pushback from education on things that we know are beneficial in learning itself. So same thing with ideas of giving people a second chance. Once they've got a grade back and they got the feedback, well, now they know what they could do better. Have we baked into our structure the possibility that they can learn from their mistakes? We basically give pushback back to that in education, even though there's overwhelming evidence that it benefits learners. So there's some things that we have to change about our entire systems thinking. So Winsome actually said, I love this idea of mind wandering, but is there good mind wandering? Is there bad mind wandering? How do you know when it's okay to mind wander? When should you let people go? The bottom line idea here is that this is not something that the teacher dictates. It's that something that we appreciate and understand and know has a benefit. Toggling between multiple levels of consciousness, focused attention, reflection stages, planning are all distinct neural networks in the brain. Your brain cannot stay in any one of those single stages of consciousness too long without becoming exhausted. It's way too much cognitive load to maintain that particular network going on and on and on. But if you allow for toggling between distinct neural networks, there is a benefit. So the idea is to be aware of this, Winsome, but maybe you're not planning. Okay, now 1, 2, 3, mind wander. You're just allowing and accepting that this is actually a good space for some people to be at different moments of their learning outcomes. So then the type D research is basically the concept of flipping. We know that flipping, there's tons of clear evidence that this really works if and when certain conditions are met. This flipping the classroom is wonderful. Sending the documented video information of the content knowledge, dates, facts, formulas, names of people, just factual things, flipping Bloom's taxonomy and all those things that you need to memorize. Sending that in a video beforehand is fantastic to allow for synchronous time where we can actually talk about the information because it allows us to focus. It gave me the chance to focus in on a handful of questions to actually try to respond and go deeper into the information. So we know this works better when the students watch the video. And we know they watch the video when it's linked to a quiz. And we know they do that when the face time is not reduced. This is not, if you're just flipping it, then you've got a MOOC. And those are incredibly insufficient, which is why many people say, oh, be careful of flipping. There's mixed data about it. There's only mixed data if you don't do it right. But if you do it right, this means that you're avoiding the things. It doesn't work when students don't watch the video. And they don't watch the video because they think the content's going to be repeated in the face-to-face class, or there is no face-to-face class. So if you think that, then it doesn't work. If there's no accountability, people don't watch the videos. So if you do flipping right, there's a ton of wonderful evidence there, but it's things that we have to sort of expand our understanding of the nuanced reasons that it does work or does not work, and to do it right. The second to last category has to do with things that are, given their thumbs up and okay in education and in psychology, and these are desired things, but because we continue in education to flip-flop in our definitions, they make it a moving target and nobody knows what to measure. When we say it is great if you have a classroom in which kids think they can dare to err, it's okay to make mistakes, we have high error tolerance, that sounds good at one level, and because we know that that makes kids more open to making mistakes. It allows the students to actually explore more. This is really super important in STEM classes, for example, and they learn faster, and they also learn other traits like how to be resilient in their own efforts, and they don't see making a mistake, saying the wrong answer as a failure. They just see it as part of a process. The main problem with that, though, is what are we measuring, right? So we know that smart students make a lot of errors, but how do we create that environment? How do you measure if you have an environment that allows for errors? And that's really hard. This is why the evidence that we can get that that is actually beneficial is really hard to pull up. Same thing with other concepts. We all think differentiation is important, inclusion is important, but what are we measuring? And those things are on educators like us to define, because they're not well enough defined to measure well right now. Finally, here, Winston, is the answer to your question. What one thing could you do, or should you start with? There's other things which are totally low-hanging fruit, which are accepted in education. They have support from other learning sciences, but they only simply depend on a teacher taking the initiative to employ them. And they are things like, for example, with evidence behind them, communication predictability. When the student knows when, where, and how they're going to get messages from the student, when, where, and how to ask for help, when, where, and how. If all of those things are predictable, that enhances learning. We have evidence from psychology, we have evidence from neuroscience. We also know that things like strong student-teacher relationships have a huge impact on learning outcomes. We have that information from education, we also have it from neuroscience. We also know that training executive functions has a lot of support in both of these different places. We just don't have a lot of teachers doing all of these things. So this has a lot to do with teachers taking the initiative to actually employ them. So that would be the low-hanging fruit that Winston and Fanny were asking. Which ones actually are the way to go? So of those 40 things that we talked about, there are different objectives: mastery learning, deeper learning, metacognitive awareness, growth mindsets, daring to err, optimal performance, having a relevant curriculum, differentiation, social contagion, strong communities, and personalization. It's all of those things are beneficial. They all work, and they all work online, face-to-face, hybrid. All of these things can work in all situations, which means that we're asking the wrong question. Which of these things do I apply? You should basically make this decision based on what the learning objective is. Once we know the objective, it doesn't matter what the only thing that's going to change about the entire planning is the modality. Am I teaching this face-to-face or online? That's the only thing that changes, but the pedagogy will remain, okay? So if we look at this list, you can divide this list yourself. That'd be a nice activity. Which ones of these are near transfer studies? Which ones of these are equivalencies? Which ones are far transfer studies from neuroscience to education and from education to neuroscience? Which of these have been accepted and we have lots of evidence, it's just that teachers aren't doing it? And which of these are really low-hanging fruit that is just attitudinal? You could do this tomorrow. So that would be the invitation, is to think now back on that video that you watched about these 40 different pedagogies and think about how you can actually apply this. So tried to put this into historical context to share a little bit of vocabulary. And I now just want to leave you with one last thought. Remember we talked about toggling back and forth? Well, one stage of thinking, of consciousness, has to do with reflection. We don't do enough of that in education. We don't give students enough time to stop and think. One of the beauties of flipping is that students can stop, pause you, think about it for a while, write down their own thoughts, they can reflect. So I'd like to invite you right now. We also know Linda Darling-Hammond has been really adamant in pointing out these kinds of one-off webinars don't make any impact unless the teachers extend the experience. They've watched the video beforehand and they take the time to reflect. Is there anything that I just said that was new to you? Is there anything that's interesting that you want to follow up on? And is there anything that you might even do to change your personal or professional practice? If you're able to do that, then that would mean that this would be a successful intervention today. And we hope that that's something you take away. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn this back over to my co-presenters to hear some of their insights and their ideas related to the information. Thank you very much.
Great. So now we're going to be joined by Courtney to give her reflections and insights in her work. Thank you so much, Tracey. Courtney?
Thank you, Tracey. So I'll share my screen if that's okay with everyone. But while I get my screen set up, can you give me a 1 in the chat if you are feeling great? We always have to check in. That's one thing that we tend to do is we go, and we never ask a person how they are feeling. So give me a 1 in the chat if you are feeling great or feeling good. 1 in the chat. All right. Can you all see my screen? Not.
No, just
no,
you.
You can't see it? Just me? Oh my gosh, that's a great thing. But let me give you my screen. Hold on. What about now? What about
better?
Yes. Awesome. So Tracey, thank you for sharing. And I did do my homework just for you to know. I watched the video and I was in my little amen corner in my living room because I agreed with so much of what you've shared. And one thing that you brought up is that research is there to support best practices, but what's missing is the how, and how do we implement this research? And so what I want to share with you before I dive into it is just giving you a little bit about the program that I work for. Because in order for you to leverage technology for teaching and learning, you have to have certain systems in place and you have to have leadership in place, no matter where you are across the world. And so with Digital Promise, we have an initiative called the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools program, in which we provide technology, one-to-one technology and professional learning for teachers that are a part of our program. And we've also branched out and start providing professional learning opportunities for others that are not a part of our program. But looking at this image here, when you see Digital Promise, know that we are working at intersections. Our mission is to actually make a connection, take that research, get educators, get developers of those tech tools, come together and speak in layman terms so it could support the teacher. It can support the teacher with implementing strategies such as the 40 that Tracey has implemented. And so that is our role. And looking at the digital learning gap, the problems that we see, access. We see participation is one of the issues, and also powerful use. And I'll talk about powerful use in a moment. But when we look at all three of these things, in order for teachers to be successful, we have to ensure that our students have access to watch the videos while they're at home, make sure they're able to participate by leveraging instructional strategies that requires them to be who they are, where they are allowed to bring in their experiences. Because although students are students and they're learners, they can teach teachers. So as a teacher, you have to remember your job is not to be that sage on the stage, but to pull out the information that is inside that student. And so our goal is to ensure that all of our students have powerful learning experiences, that they can become lifelong and confident learners with tools that they can use to succeed in schoolwork and life, no matter where you are in the world. And these powerful learning experiences, they have to be personal, they have to be accessible, they have to be authentic. That means I need to be able to see myself within this strategy. So as a teacher, if you're going to choose a strategy, you have to select a strategy in which that child or that learner is able to see themselves. It has to be where it's challenging. They have to be connected and they have to be able to collaborate. And so when we look at this digital inclusion piece, we hold the key to create more access to technology. We hold the key to remove the barriers and ensure that our students are engaged in a digitally inclusive world. I mean, if we look at the world, a world of economic growth is where everyone can prosper. There are no barriers. And so when we look at the strategies that Tracey mentioned, when you select a strategy that's research-based, ask, why am I choosing this? What is it that we want the students to be able to do? Sometimes we take research and we say things, but then we have to go back to that common, why are we doing this? If you're not able to answer why, then you have to reconsider the strategy that you may choose to use for that particular lesson. And within our program, we have 6 elements of success. And let me give you a pop quiz, just using the chat. How many elements of success do we have? Let's see. Just making sure you're engaged. How many elements of success do we have? Write it in the chat. Okay, Tracy said 6. I saw it. All right, making sure. All right, we do have 6 elements. The first element is strong district and school leadership team. That means your leaders have to support you. Students see whether or not leaders are supporting their learning. That leadership team should be cross-functional, and it has to be, that leadership team has to consist of a group of individuals that are welcoming to change, welcoming to acknowledging its culture, and having a clear vision of school, the school culture, and what teaching and learning should look like, while leveraging technology to enhance teaching and learning. You have to have a strong transformation plan. You have to say, we're using technology for this and it aligns to this learning science. You have to state these things. You have to have ongoing professional learning. You'll notice that I didn't say professional development, because ongoing professional learning is ongoing, as Tracey mentioned, just like having this one workshop and you all are across the globe attending this and filling your bucket because you care to learn. Professional development is one thing, professional learning is something totally different. And so you have to be able to, or be willing to commit. Consistent access. Can't tell kids to watch videos at home if they don't have access, or you have not taken the time to choose tools that will allow the students to have access. And you got to incorporate that family. No matter where you are, your families have to be involved in the learning experience. And you have to have equity as a mindset. And I won't talk to the slides because I have a video that I want to share with you that I think, Tracey, you'll really love, because it demonstrates many of the strategies that you discussed in your flip video. Skipping this, going back to powerful learning. Powerful learning has to be personal. It has to be accessible. It has to be authentic and challenging. It has to be connected and collaborative. It has to be inquisitive and reflective, that reflective piece, no matter if you're talking about students in lower grades or upper grades. All of these elements that you see, they are necessary for powerful learning to occur. And on our Digital Promise website, which I could share the link in a moment, we have many resources to support. And we have the research to support why these elements are key as well. And it, once again, aligns with Tracey, what Tracey shared. In this video, this is, and I get teary-eyed watching this, because this is a video created by students where they actually had to go back and collaborate with one another. They had to go back and create, but the teachers saw the students for who they were, and they became a facilitator and provided supports for the students. They provided guidance in the beginning by placing systems in their classroom and teaching their students about the systems and how to engage with one another. But the teacher took a step back and let the students become the teacher at that moment. I'm going to share the video. And this school is in Compton, California.
Hello from Bunch Middle
Can you all
School
hear?
in Compton, California. Our tech team are exploring environmental issues in our community, and we were trying to create measurable solutions.
Here are some ideas that we've been working on.
The problem that my group is trying to solve is environment issues, which is, for me, energy.
In Compton, we have a lot of traffic and cars, and we need to improve our public transportation. My project is about a recycling robot that goes to people's houses to collect cans.
So I'm learning about the carbon footprint, and my goal is to have it so that everyone in Compton has a lower carbon footprint than they have now. I've been collecting data, and I found out that in my family, our carbon footprint is above average, which isn't good.
We are working on food deserts. Where I live, there's not that many nice and organic food stores. There's liquor markets or food markets, but right there they have junk food, soda, chips.
We're going to take the project back to our community, and it's basically going to inform people about what food deserts are, because some people don't actually recognize that we are living in a food desert.
My project is about illegal dumping. Sometimes while I'm walking on the sidewalk, there's always just trash. People actually dump like hazardous things. Like for example, the wood pallets, they have nails. They split them open and you could walk, you never know where the nail is, you could step on it.
It's important for me because it involves me and my family, and it feels great to help other people fix this problem as well, because it also affects them.
It's important for students in Compton to know so that we can teach others on how to be eco-friendly, so that we can do it ourselves, make sure the world is a better place.
Nos da felicidad saber que podemos ayudar a otras personas, poder resolver sus problemas, en vez de que otras personas lo hagan, nos hace sentir a nosotros mejor, más felices de dar ideas o de hacerlo nosotros.
We used STEM throughout the whole process. Science to research, technology to code and program, engineering to design the robot. And we used math to find the data that we need to build our robot.
It can be very fun to help our community, solving different problems using the kind of stuff we learn here at school.
Before I started doing the research, I would just walk around and see the trash, be like, oh, it's just part of a normal day. I found out that if we actually find a solution to this problem, it could be a big change to our environment, to our community. So I feel like I'm doing my part.
Seeing them come back, leveraging those iPads, using data, using alternative methods of either collecting information or interview or video. It's a sense of activism. The digital divide is real, but with the help of Verizon, our kids are able to bridge that gap. And even more importantly, they're able to provide something for our community. And I think that is the true essence of education.
I hope we inspired you for your own STEM projects.
Those are our kids. This is what happens when you allow the students to teach you. And as teachers, when you take the strategies and you think about the strategies that you select for your students, I heard data analysis. I heard students thinking about their communities. No matter where you are, this is where our students are. They want to feel connected. They want to feel involved. And seeing this example, how did you all feel? And you can unmute yourself. I want to allow people to unmute or invite people to unmute. I see Sharon said, awesome. As teachers, this is our future. Did I hear someone unmute? Inspired and hopeful. So yes, thinking about those strategies that Tracey shared, thinking about having systems in place and teaching your students the systems or co-designing those systems with those students will allow them to be proactive teachers. And your job, you'll always be a student or a lifelong learner, but they will make it easier and you can actually see the fruits of your labor. And I do agree that this makes me hopeful because our students are engaging in learning in which they are involved and they're contributing to their community. And so how do we do this? Within our program and in my role, I support the learning design of professional learning. And it's my belief that in order for teachers to understand student learning and truly understand learning, they have to engage in the learning experience, the same thing that the students have to experience. And so we model within our professional learning design, we model the same thing that we think understanding by design. I don't know if you all have heard of that, but we leverage understanding by design, and we also leverage impact model, the impact cycle by Jim Knight. And I also incorporate some International Coaching Federation strategies into our learning experience. And so here on this graphic, we have the learn it, do it, share it, and show it. This is the experience that our teachers go through because we want them to see what it's like to be a student and what it means to engage in 360 learning. And so where you see where it says learn it, we have a live learning experience, which also does have pre-work, or I don't want to even call it pre-work. It was a word I used the other day. It's basically a task for them to complete prior to coming, the same thing that Tracey did, because you want them to be engaged and come with some type of prior knowledge so you can leverage that time with them. You're building foundational knowledge so everyone can speak the same language or have that common language that they're using. Then we come right to do it. That's self-guided learning, where we empower people to learn at their own pace. We give them a window of time, which you can do this with your students. Say, you know what? We've learned about this. I want you to have about 2 weeks to complete this task. This is my due date for it, but you have this window of time so you can learn in your own place, space, and pace. We just want this done by this date so you can demonstrate your learning. And we can talk about assessment another day, because assessment can look totally different depending on that learner variability. Then we go around to share and show it. That is where our teachers have coaches to come in and support them with their learning, their application of learning. How does this look in a classroom? You can have a share and show it day where the student is teaching and you can coach that student and engage in thought partnership. That empowers the students to say that my teacher knows that I know this content, or I may not understand it. It gives you that opportunity. That partnership gives you an opportunity for students to reflect over learning. Oftentimes with assessments, and when we teach students, if they get it wrong, we don't pause and say, we'll go and say, let's reteach the whole lesson. No. There's no need for you reteaching the whole lesson. Let's explore what you submitted and let's find out your process and let's think through this. And so share and show it, that is that opportunity for you to do true coaching as a teacher. As a teacher, I feel that our roles have evolved over time, and no longer are we that person in front of that chalkboard, dry erase board. I mean, even in front of the camera right now, our roles have evolved, and you have to choose, who am I going to show up as today, depending on the goals of the lessons. And so with this, and I know I'm looking at the time, with this, teachers, I challenge you to think about, what role can I serve? What instructional practices can I implement? But if you're willing to implement an instructional practice, be willing to be the learner of the practice and experience the practice as well. Because students are very intuitive. They can see whether or not you know what you're talking about when you mention a strategy, or if you can empathize with them by going through the same strategies or experiencing the strategies that you want to practice with your students. It allows you to gain empathy. And when you gain empathy, you'll be able to make an impact. I wanted to open the floor. I see comments. I see that Monica shared that the video was powerful for storytelling. You could say the same thing in a document or produce that video to inspire kids and teachers. Exactly. And the students did this video. Their coach was there just guiding them and serving as a thought partner. But that video a student created. The students led the project. And storytelling is really key. It's key and it's important. It's great for learning. So I want to stop here and open the floor.
I think we're going to turn it over back to Tracey to kind of lead the broader discussion with you and Miriam and Joy.
Okay. Thanks. I would just love to, I don't know if Tracey, Miriam, who wants to start, if it would be great to just hear your initial reflections. Miriam, do you want to jump in?
I can go. So thank you very much. It was very nice hearing you both. It's very exciting and with many ideas. And I feel very comfortable because we have been discussing in the same track as you have been working. They are both, no? And I have some experience that I could share with you and comment on practical work. But first of all, I want to make a very quick picture of the context that we have been working today, which is not a very friendly context since the pandemic and even before. We have been, you know that we are living in a very strong and bad condition now in Brazil with many deaths. And one thing that is, I think it's all over the world, but it's very hard for us was the school system stopped and the digital, social, and health divide was very strong, and it appeared in a very strong way in Brazil. So this posed many challenges to all this knowledge base that we have been struggling to work to improve the education in Brazil. And it was very nice watching the video and to look at all these 40 pedagogies. I think they are very nice, and they gather together. I don't see them very separately. I can see them as isolated pedagogies. I think they are all interconnected, and I think we could do some good clusters with them when working with the teachers. I didn't do the exercise myself yet, but I think there is a very nice work to do, because deep learning is related to many other concepts that are there, and it's related also to mastery learning and to many of the strategies that we can use in mastery learning. The social aspect of learning is very important to reflection, because when we listen to the other, we have the opportunity to reflect. So one thing that we try to do is to work with children here and continue working with the public school systems online, since we were isolated, and there was very low participation. I think there is the divide was very strong, not only because of the digital divide, but also because of the cultural, social divide. Know that the school doesn't mean much for the children. And this is, I think it's a very important fact that these pedagogies can work with to bring school more closer to the student's life, to the student reality. So these, I think, are very good points to bring to our context. No? And what two initiatives that I wanted to share with you that we tried to do online was one that we work in an elementary school, which had very little students participation, but we could build a web radio together. So we decided with the teachers and the students with no grade level specificity, but we together work in building a web radio during this pandemic period. And everything was done by the students, which is great. Since the decision to choose the name, the decision to do the logo, to select which would be the support, it would be Spotify, Instagram, and that's all, until they get to producing, researching, discussing the themes, writing up, researching. So it was a very complete pedagogy. I call this a complete pedagogy, that we all could interlace all the topics and work together. And what is amazing is that we thought that the children would choose to work with COVID, but our expectation was not met. And they selected that they wanted to work first with the topic of racism, which is also very strong for them in schools. And during the COVID, it was even stronger because it appeared much more in their lives. So we had many problems in general, and the other was in the high school, that we were in school with teachers. We worked very much in partnership with the school in the classroom, with doing research. We work with design-based research, basically. So we are in class for a long time with the teachers, supporting them in a way that we do a kind of in-service, no? And we can reflect and teach and talk with them and exchange ideas. And we were working in high school, doing in the chemistry classroom. And we want that the students, usually they don't understand why do they need to learn chemistry. So it's not important for their lives, it's not important for their future, their social conditions will not meet them in an activity that they feel that it's connected to them. So we think that we should do something about that for many reasons. One of the reasons is that chemistry is part of life. So we can't, we need to make students understand that chemistry is part of their life. So it makes sense for them. The other point is that we need to improve the scientific culture in general. This is a very important issue. The scientific culture must integrate their practice, their everyday practice. One point is what we are living today. What we have been living today with the negationism and all these problems that we have been living all over the world. And so the students were looking at their territory they live, and they were photographing all the environmental problems that they could identify from their homes until school, to get to the school, in the way to the school. But the pandemic came and they couldn't anymore. They were isolated, there was no school anymore. So they were using the Google Classroom, and we decided to use the Google Street View to work with this. And it was a very good experience. In addition to have a new tool in their repertoire, they were able to understand their territory, they mapped the problems, they localized, so they integrated this knowledge, and then they selected what they wanted to learn about in chemistry, which was the topic of water, because they saw that the most important problem was in the area they lived was water. So these are some experiences that I feel that are strongly connected with the pedagogies that Tracey brought and Courtney emphasized in terms of practical work. No, it's getting the students as protagonists, as the center agents of their own learning process, connected with a scientific culture, no, and with and evaluating and how do you say, empowering their emotionally to continue learning, which is very important in our social environment, in our social and economic environment. I think these are the basic points. I don't know how much time I have for them. I could go on and show other examples, but.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're really just about time and we need to get Joyty in. So I'm just asking the audience if we can have another few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. But we are going to be staying on, for more general discussion anyway. So thank you so much, Miriam. I think we're going to hear from Joyty at this point.
Thank you, Winsome. Winsome to me is an English word which says exactly that. Winsome, you say my name very sweetly. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I practiced.
Yeah, who has a name that starts with a J and then is followed by a Y? I mean, how do you say that? So I feel that what I do and where I am is in a completely different world, perhaps even in another planet. Exactly like Brazil, India went through a really crunching COVID brush. I personally lost family. It was just another, it was a nightmare. But the nightmare started long before that. Our educational system has grown with just numbers, they've always followed the numbers. We can now say that we have every child registered in a school. But when you walk into the school, you realize that these children are getting an education that went out of fashion maybe 10 years before I was born, and I was born in the 1950s. So really, it is not up to much. You really can't do anything about it. And there are 40 million kids in school. I mean, that's a number that is, and in government schools, you know, and you think to yourself, how is this a problem that I can solve? Fortunately, tech stepped in, and we're an ed tech product, but all the time we kept very close. We always told ourselves, even in the word ed tech, ed comes before tech. So education has to lead the tech. So we are very focused on education. We make sure that we teach the kids with the right education so that the tech can support the education. If you are doing an ed tech thing, you can grab this. This is great fun because you can grab all the data you want. You can cut, slice, twirl the data any way you want. You can get all the answers to all the questions you want. But how do you, when it's not people like you and me that get a direct connect to the kids, how do you change the teaching practices that has stayed, that was probably old even when their grandfathers were in school, you know? However, with that, we decided to make a teacher-facing product. And at this point, if you think the problem is solved, you are suddenly faced with the fact that the teachers are first-generation learners. So teachers grew up in homes that don't have books. And if teachers don't have books, they are not getting the information from the printed word. They're getting the information all right, and sometimes very effectively, and sometimes heart-stoppingly, energizingly, but they're not getting it from the printed word most often. So when you have a tech product, fortunately, of course, everyone knows how to use a smartphone. So access is patchy, internet is patchy, smartphone coverage is patchy, all the things that we talked about through the last 3D, all of that exists here. How do you solve for that? So we went around solving each one of these problems. The tech was the easiest one to solve. When we said we had no coverage on the far side of the Garo Hills in Meghalaya, which looks like heaven itself. If you go there, it's where the Himalayas ends. There is no internet there. There is no phone connection there. What do? So you roll out your Raspberry Pi little device, you load all the lessons there, you set up a micro Wi-Fi, and you send it out one to every school. And you can, with a micro Wi-Fi, you can grab the lessons onto your smartphone. Problem solved. How do you solve a problem when, I know I sound like Sound of Music, but how do you solve a problem when the teacher doesn't know what to do with the lesson that you are teaching? So you implicitly input teacher instructions. So the teacher reads the instructions and then carries them. And we realized suddenly that we were getting, in India, which is a huge country, we are getting touchdowns from every state in the country. We can see that because we grab that data. So, and we don't go there, we don't sell, we don't advertise. So what is going on? You know, one teacher was talking to the other teacher. So if anyone tells you that Indians don't talk to Pakistanis, that is amazingly false, because we have lots of Pakistanis that use our product, and that slipped over the border to Afghanistan, to Iran, to Iraq, and it's sort of crawling along the ground. We walk in to test lessons in the furthest village in my home state, and I find one teacher teaching 10 teachers how to use our product, which it's called Meghshala, which is Sanskrit for cloud school. So, and when we walk in and, we walked in and said, we can help you, we can help train you. They were amazed that this could happen. So in the middle of what looks like a complete disaster is the shining light of a hope. And we are very careful where we put our feet so that we don't crush any new growth. We don't grow the wrong things. We make access possible as much as we can. We teach the best way we can, given all these strictures. So how would you, for example, I was listening to all of you talk, and you were all talking about pedagogy. And I'm a whole, 8 states away from a teacher who's using my product and hasn't a clue what that pedagogy is about. But fortunately, first generation learners learn from doing things. So if she just follows, or he just follows a lesson, he imbibes what the pedagogy is. And suddenly, about 4 months later, he says, my God, that was what that was about. And it sort of begins to fall in. So in a very gentle kind of way, we're trying to get them into a level of operation that is far away from where they should be, but getting closer. So to give you the flip side of the coin that we started this webinar with, to the extent that we can move with EdTech, I must say is a call for hope and perhaps really deep thinking on how best to make this new system work for us. I know that you were short on time. I didn't know if you wanted me to talk a little bit more, but if you ask me questions about what we do, I can answer.
Winsome, I think that you're muted.
Yes, I was going to turn it over to you, Tracey, to kind of wrap up, and then we can have further conversations.
I think that these were beautiful complementary ideas to also look and see the reality check. If we're looking at the global science of learning network, to know is not enough, right? There's a lot of good information, and I began by talking about where evidence comes from, but now carrying this over into the real execution and face-to-face and ground level teacher interaction with students is a whole nother level that has its own complications, and especially in these times of COVID. So Miriam and Jyoti, that was just lovely contributions. So thank you very much for adding that to the discussion. I have put in the chat a hyperlink to the Nature Partner Journal Science of Learning. We're doing a special call, and Nancy Law and I are editing a new version for any of you who have gone through these experiences and have documented what has happened during COVID in education around the world. We are trying our best to field studies that can be included to talk about these long-lasting impacts. We have this strange condition of actually being in the airplane while we're flying it. We're trying very hard. We're trying to build it while we're flying. Here we are in the middle of COVID still going on and making these quick adjustments, yet other things in science are still moving on. So how do we actually join all of these realities, social realities, with what's going on in tech and other science advances? How do we bring all those pieces together? So we are looking forward to anybody who would be able to contribute to that. I believe the call is until the end of July, I believe, for just the an abstract. If you do have an idea, we'd love to see that from you. So I would just like to just say thank you so much for people's interest in trying to see how the science of learning is and has been changed by this COVID situation, what is advanced or what continues to be the same, and all the challenges that we continue to have right now. I know that many of us are in spaces where people are, they thought that we're over this. We're not over this. And if anybody, we've lived a very strange experience in the past 3 days here in New York, in which the wildfire smoke from the west coast of the United States has actually covered us. And it was a reminder and a call from the United Nations that said, COVID will be solved. We are strong and resilient as humanity. We're going to get through this. But this is not the last challenge education will face. Education is going to be challenged continually, especially by climate change and other things. And so the lessons learned, whatever we can learn from all of this, let's choose the things that can be carried over into new and challenging contexts from here on out in the future. Not just document what we know works, but project into other structures and help us reach more people, especially for a more equitable distribution of quality educational experiences. So we hope that this sort of inspires that reflection. And for anybody who would like to stay on, and we do want to hear from all of you who've been listening so attentively and probably have your own ideas, we'd love to hear you chime in. But for those of you who do need to leave, we thank you very much for being with us this morning, and deeply appreciate your interest in this important topic of, what will remain after COVID, and how do we project into the future of a higher quality, more efficient education for all of us. So thank you very much. And for anybody who would like to open their mic and take the floor, please go ahead. And anybody who has to leave, thank you so much for coming.
So if I might just tell you what we've done with COVID. So our product is actually a set of PowerPoint presentations, if you wish, slide by slide, that the teacher just scrolls through, and she has notes on how to teach that lesson, so that we can actually handhold the teacher through teaching every single lesson. When COVID hit, that put an end to that, didn't it? So what one of the people from the ground said was, why don't we just film it and get a 10-minute film out of the lesson in the teacher's own voice and send it through WhatsApp to her group of kids. And they can hear it. So it's a flipped classroom in a kind of way. No, not in a kind of way, in every kind of way. So it's a flipped classroom, and after the kids asynchronously listen to the lesson, they all sit down together and they do the task together on a many-to-many conversation. Many-to-many conversations work in 4G networks. Out in the depths of a village, that doesn't work. So we use ham radio. So we have one radio, and everybody clusters around that radio because they're keeping social distancing and so on. And everyone shouts out their answers, and they do their task, and the teacher describes it. And so it's either at a mosque or it's at a temple, and it was the erasing of differences between some religions in some villages. It was the headman, the village headman, would invite the kids into his house, and he would have the ham radio there. So all these sort of things happened. In Sikkim, which is an even further away place, it happened that the television studio offered to run a school timetable with our lessons that is now going out all over Sikkim. Now everybody has a television set. So anyone, the grade 1s sit down at a certain time, the grade 2s sit down at a certain time, and they listen to the lesson. And then the teachers she can't see what the kids are doing, but at least he or she is able to direct the kids into tasks that work. So a multiple of things happen. When these kids go back to school, as the government is threatening they will in about 15 days, makes my heart freeze. But that if they go back in 15 days, the kids' lives don't change. They still continue with the same lessons. The teachers are right now standing in front of them, and they do the same kind of thing When it closes down again, they go back to their homes and they hear it over the phone. So the kids have a fairly level progress through the lessons. The teachers do the flipping between home and school and home and school.
I just wanted to compliment, I've added something in the chat. I saw the Raspberry Pi experiment examples in Burma and in parts of West Africa. And I just wanted to share that the New Jersey teachers, New Jersey has the best math scores in the United States as a state. And they actually were asked, you know, how do you do this? How do you train your teachers? How do you get your students up in your math scores? And they created a series of video interactions. Then they actually wanted to see if it worked outside of the States. And so when they apply, they use this throughout Africa. And now they've created an entire free series of maths education, which I've just put an example link on there. But it is a pretty amazing and dynamic structure in which you can get people who have been without technology, without internet to do this. But number one around the world in a recent UN study are looking at people get educated through radio, then TV, and then phones. Almost nobody has computers, nice computers like we do, but phones. And so that is kind of the adapting that we have to do, is that whatever we think we can do in this, in education, face-to-face, but we should also be thinking of these alternative modalities of instruction to make sure that everything we suggest, like all of the pedagogies I've suggested, can be done in any of those formats. And that's the whole idea, is let's try to look at what can be used in all modalities. Yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
Were there other comments from other people?
Can I compliment? Can I compliment?
Yes,
yeah.
Miriam.
I just want to share very quickly. There's someone. I just want to share very quickly. We just did a study with 1,100 teachers in the Northeast, and during the pandemic, and we asked for which were the challenges and which were the drivers that all this situation have posed for the post-pandemic period. And I think there are some important points. So I'm going to the challenges very quickly, and then to the drivers. The challenges were equality and diversity issues, and also the divide and the gender issues, the highest violence, many things that has happened that was a challenge for the educational process for the teachers, they felt. The other thing was the digital exclusion that we already spoke about. The lack of educational support to do innovations, to innovate in school. No, so the support is also from the school system, but also from the families. There is a cultural gap towards studying in school and so on. And the other point of the challenge was scientific illiteracy, the problem of scientific literacy that has become so strong, the depreciation of science, no, as something that is not so important, critical, lack of critical views, no, of what's going on, of the news and so on. And the drivers, I think they're important, is that the possibility of partnership with for doing projects that with more sustainability, but because this is something that worried the teachers, that so we are partners, we go to the schools, we research and help them, but then in a certain point, we are not anymore at school. What is the sustainability that they think that we should build together for continuing, no? The other is new approaches to empower students. And the most important one is learn how to learn. So this was something that was very important for them, no? So the idea of students as protagonists. The other is cooperation of all the society actors. So the possibility of university and the business and industry, everybody collaborating with the school culture, and the school community. And finally, the scientific literacy. But the idea is that science and social science have to work together, something that it's very important, because this situation showed them that they cannot explain just by the scientific. For example, the COVID is not only explained by the scientific facts, but the way it affects society that differs from groups and groups. So they put this. So I think it's interesting because it's a very new data that they brought to us. There are more data, but I think for now it's something for us to think about.
Thank you. Are there other comments that people would like to share? Mirela, Karen is very intensely reflecting on this. I don't know if Karen, if you have some ideas that you'd like to share, or Fanny. Gary, I think you're about to say something. When you put your hand over your mouth like that, it's about, do I say it? Do I not say it? Are you sure you don't? Yes, go ahead and say it. No. You're okay?
Hello, Tracy.
Go ahead.
And when I was another course with connection with Tracy, and I am very interested in the taxonomy resource, and I think it is very important apply to education. The teachers need prepare too much for learn and apply the new pedagogies or strategies. Yeah, it's very important. I feel very happy. To stay here.
Thank you. And I think, Winston, I'm not sure if you would like to also come back to the working group and the objectives of the teaching working group, and maybe share that with anybody who might want more information. I saw some things in the chat.
That's great. Yes.
I saw the working groups. I'm sorry.
Go on, Fanny. Finish?
Continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say the GSOLN has 2 working groups underway right now. The Teacher Support Network is the first one that we launched earlier this year, actually a little bit in 2020, but mostly this year. And it really focuses on teacher issues, really looking at teacher trying to navigate COVID, especially. And we started this discussion in the Teacher Support Network around how do we support teachers' well-being as they support students' well-being. The idea of the working group is that a group of people come together and look at the playing field, if you will, among teachers, and they decide organically what issues they want to take on. So they started off with this discussion around teacher well-being. They focus primarily on relationships to start, but they're meeting on a regular basis to look both at pre-service teacher education and in-service professional learning. And so it's very organic. It's a small group of 8 people right now. We need more people to join us to really explore the issues and be able to really disseminate information as it relates to the science to support teaching and learning from the teacher to teacher perspective and the teacher to student perspective. We'll send an email out following this, really calling more people into that working group. Again, we have both the in-service perspective and the pre-service perspective, very organic. We did put one paper out, it's on the website, it's on relationships, and it's focusing on the science of learning of relationships. And we're in the middle of putting together some very short video clips with teachers from around the world that we want to disseminate. That's the Teacher Support Network. Now we're launching the digital learning working group. We are in the process right now, which is why I'm asking folks on this call to let me know if you're willing just to come to kind of a listening session where a few of us come together. We talk about all this massive amount of content that has been provided to us, especially through Tracey's work in leading the series, and identify specific issues that we want to explore further. It really is a place to learn and grow together. And while we're doing that as a professional learning community type, while we're doing that, we're also looking to see what tangible work or products we might work on together that can, be disseminated and influence these more science-based practices in for teachers. So 2 working groups, Teacher Support Network and the Digital Learning Working Group. And I see the crossing of those already gonna be happening. So if you're interested, just reach out to me directly, and again, we'll invite you to the calls, and it's very organic. So there's not a one direction that we're going. It really is up to the working group members to decide how we advance these issues. If there's more conversation, I'm very happy to set up a call too with anyone one-on-one just to discuss it further. But just join us, see how it goes. And again, we will send an email out with this information more to the network to see if you, and set up some meetings that we can advance the conversations. Is that helpful? Any other questions on that?
Mirela's about to ask a question. No? Okay. You sure?
No, I am not speaking English very well. I am very happy. I try to understand many things. This is the second time that I continue a course with Tracey. This is wonderful. I am very happy to listen everyone. I learn more. I will go for many ideas of this course. I thank you for the links. I review when I have a time. I am very happy. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Any other comments or questions? Jyoti, did you want to chime in on something else? You were about to say something beforehand, and I think I cut you off.
No. Well, I'd like to be part of that group, and I will. I'll write in and want to be a part of it.
Great.
Thank you. I was just going to say, you and both of you speakers today gave me many things to think about that I can use, and I do plan to go back to the recording and some of my notes and use that to drive discussions in the working group. So would love to have you join.
Oh, that would be lovely. Now, I did save the chat, and the chat will be there when I go back to watch the video that you sent out.
Yeah, the very cool thing about the way Zoom works out, and since we recorded it in that strange fashion, is that you should be able to see the people, whoever was sharing their screens, as well as the chat will be there. And the person who owns the platform, Andrea, will also see the transcript of the discussion. So there's a lot of, it's very interesting, a lot of good data there as well. But yes, if you wanted personally, you just put on the bottom where the chat is, there's 3 dots. You can just copy the entire chat right now. And then you can have that information there as well. Okay.
Well, it does save chat, and it says it'll show in the Finder. So
it's on your, it'll end up probably around your desktop, or it's on your in your documents, but it will be there available. So okay.
Excellent.
Yeah. So
I wonder if Andrea wants to chime in here, Tracey. I'd love to hear. Andrea.
I just want to thank everyone for this has been a 3-part series, and this was a beautiful ending to it, and bringing it to the practical and the practical problems as well. So it's very interesting to think about best practices, what must be included, and then the situations we end up in, and how we can customize and be responsive to those situations. And then there are the extreme conditions where really very little is possible, and you have to actually decide that everything is possible because you toss everything out and start over. So, you know, enlightening conversations, very interesting. Loved hearing some student voices in there also. And I'm very grateful to all of our speakers and the wonderful commentary, and look forward to seeing more actually. So thank you. And thank you, Tracey, for the fantastic kind of infrastructure your book put forward for us to have this series and interleave some of our foreign partners in interesting ways also. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
And thank
you,
you for the
Winsome,
opportunity. The book, for those of you who just came for this part and didn't come to the first two, was born actually during COVID, which was kind of crazy. So it's a lived experience based on the course that we teach at Harvard, which is it's a flipped course that has a synchronous meeting time, but we're also work with schools in 40 different countries around the world, Joyce and Miriam in Brazil, in India, and realized that all the multiple challenges, and the ask was, what will remain after COVID? What are things that work online as well as face-to-face? What are things that we could actually, you know, what is worth spending time doing? Because teachers are so pulled in so many directions during COVID, trying to upskill and learn how to do things. What is worth really investing in? And we'd hope that we synthesize this into, it's a very manageable, small and readable handbook, but it's meant to sort of say these are things that will live beyond COVID because they're just best practice, thanks to the learning sciences.